My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 65 years old, and after raising my son's 3 abandoned children for the last 15 years, he and his wife are suing me for everything. Before I tell you how a simple, dusty shoebox brought a whole courtroom to a dead silence, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The chair in this Austin courtroom was hard as rock, but I barely noticed. For hours I'd been sitting ramrod straight, my worn-out purse on my lap, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were bone white. The air smelled of old paper and stale coffee, the scent of lives being picked apart. Across the room my son Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a spot on the wall, a stranger wearing my son's face. Beside him sat his wife, Tiffany. In her sharp, cream-colored blazer and with her hair pulled back into a severe knot, she looked every bit the successful San Diego businesswoman she pretended to be. There was ice in her veins where a heart should have been. I could feel it even from 50 feet away. Her lawyer, a slick man with a voice as smooth as oil, was finishing his speech. And so, Your Honor, we are seeking immediate and full custody of the children. It is clear that Mrs. Vance has engaged in a calculated campaign of parental alienation, systematically poisoning these children against their loving father and his wife. Furthermore, we have reason to believe she has been exploiting them for financial gain. Financial gain? The words felt like a punch to the gut. I thought of the 2 jobs I worked after my husband passed, the retirement savings I drained, the nights I'd stayed up sick with worry over a fever or a bad grade. My whole world for the last 15 years had been about keeping those kids safe, fed, and loved. My mind kept drifting back to that Tuesday afternoon. Mark had pulled up to my rundown house, his car much nicer than mine. 3 toddlers, Leo, Noah, and little Chloe, were strapped in the back. "Just for a few days, Mom," he'd said, his eyes darting everywhere but at me. "Tiffany and we just need a little time to get things straight." He'd hugged them goodbye, a quick, almost frantic gesture, and promised he'd call that night. He didn't. A few days turned into a week into a month. The phone calls stopped. 15 years of silence, broken only by a handful of guilt-ridden birthday cards with no return address. And now this. A courtroom. A lawyer paid with money I couldn't imagine, spinning a tale of my cruelty and greed. The sheer audacity of it made my blood run cold. Tiffany's story was that she'd suffered from a debilitating postpartum depression, and that I had taken advantage of her vulnerability to seize control of the children. It was a lie so twisted, so vile, that it almost sounded believable coming from her lawyer's silver tongue. In my lap my hands trembled around an old, faded shoebox. The edges were soft, worn down from the countless nights I'd taken it out, tracing the faces in the photographs inside. It didn't look like much. To anyone else it was just trash. But it was my only weapon. It was the truth. Mrs. Vance has created a narrative in which she is the savior and my clients are the villains, the lawyer boomed, his voice echoing in the quiet room. It is time for that narrative to end. It is time for these children to come home. A cold fury, slow and steady, began to rise in my chest. It pushed past the hurt, past the shock. This wasn't just about custody. It was about my life's work, my very soul being trampled on and called worthless. The lawyer sat down. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. The judge, a man named Anderson with tired eyes that had seen too much, looked over his glasses at me. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "do you have anything to say in response to these allegations?" My heart hammered against my ribs. My throat was dry as dust. This was it. I could feel Tiffany's smug glare. Could feel my son's shame radiating across the room. I took a deep, shaky breath. Slowly, my aching knees protesting, I stood up. The shoebox felt impossibly heavy in my hands. "Your Honor," I began, my voice cracking at first before finding its strength. "Before you hear another lie, I'd like to present something to the court." I walked forward, each step echoing on the polished floor. I didn't look at Mark or Tiffany. I couldn't. I focused only on the judge's bench, the wooden fortress that would decide my future. I placed the shoebox on the edge of the polished wood with a soft thud. Tiffany's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! What is this nonsense? Childhood memorabilia has no place here." Judge Anderson held up a hand, silencing him without a word. He peered at the battered cardboard box, then looked at me, his eyes filled with a weary curiosity. "What is this, Mrs. Vance?" I met his gaze, and for the first time all day, I felt a flicker of hope. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting on the cool wood of the witness stand. "That, Your Honor," I said, my voice barely a whisper but clear as a bell in the silent room, "is a mother's entire life." Judge Anderson took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture that told me he'd seen 1,000 family dramas play out in this very room. He slid the shoebox closer. For a moment no one moved. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Then he lifted the lid. He didn't pull anything out at first. He just looked inside. I knew what he was seeing. A chaotic jumble of a life lived. A life I had poured into 3 little souls. He reached in and his fingers, surprisingly gentle, pulled out the first photograph. It was of the triplets on their 3rd birthday, just a year after they'd come to live with me. They were smeared with chocolate cake, wearing goofy paper hats I'd made myself. A genuine unburdened joy radiated from their faces. He set it aside and picked up another. It was Leo, age 7, beaming with pride, holding up a first-place ribbon from the school science fair. Her project was a lopsided volcano made of papier-mâché that had barely worked, but I had cheered for her like she'd just discovered a new element. Tiffany shifted in her seat, letting out an impatient sigh. "Your Honor, with all due respect, a trip down memory lane is hardly relevant." Judge Anderson didn't even look at her. He just held up a hand for silence. His eyes were fixed on the contents of the box. He pulled out a stack of report cards, each one in a plastic sleeve I'd saved. He read the teacher's comments aloud, his voice flat but carrying across the silent room. "Leo is a bright and inquisitive student, a natural leader. Her grandmother, Eleanor, is a constant presence at school functions." He paused. "Noah is a sensitive and kind boy. His grandmother's dedication is evident in his confidence. Chloe is a talented artist. It is wonderful to see her grandmother encouraging her gifts." He looked directly at Tiffany. It seems Mrs. Vance was quite involved. Before Tiffany could answer, he pulled out something else. It was a flimsy, crinkled piece of paper. A hospital bracelet. Chloe's name was printed on it. I remembered that night like it was yesterday. A 103-degree fever. A terrifying rush to the emergency room at 2 a.m. I had held her tiny, burning hand for 6 hours straight, whispering stories to her until the fever broke. Mark and Tiffany never answered their phone. "This is a waste of the court's time," Tiffany's lawyer snapped. "My client was struggling. She was ill." "Was she ill for 15 years? Judge Anderson asked, his voice dangerously quiet. He reached back into the box. This time he pulled out a thick stack of papers bound with a rubber band. It was every permission slip, every emergency contact form, every school registration document since kindergarten. He slid the rubber band off and let them cascade across his desk. The courtroom was dead silent. On every single page, in the space marked Mother/Guardian, was my name, Eleanor Vance, written in my careful, slightly shaky cursive. My phone number. My signature. "I'm looking for your name here, Mrs." He glanced at Tiffany. "It's Thompson now," she said through clenched teeth. "Mrs. Thompson. I don't seem to see it. Not once." He looked up from the sea of paper, his gaze pinning her to her chair. "Can you explain that?" Tiffany opened her mouth, then closed it. Her perfect, poised mask was cracking. She looked at Mark, a flash of panic in her eyes. My son just sank lower in his seat, as if he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "As I said," she finally managed, her voice a little too high, "I was unwell. I needed time to heal. To build a stable life for my children. A stable life that didn't involve a single phone call on Christmas? Or a birthday card." The judge's questions were like surgical strikes, precise and devastating. He turned his attention back to the box. There was one last thing in there, right at the bottom. It was a sheet of yellowing paper, folded into a small square. It was the application I had filled out for food stamps a year after the kids came to me. I had been laid off from my part-time job at the library, and my late husband's small pension wasn't enough. The shame I'd felt filling it out was nothing compared to the desperation. On the form, it asked for the whereabouts of the children's parents. I had written unknown. Judge Anderson read it silently. His face was unreadable, but I saw his jaw tighten. He folded the paper carefully and placed it back in the box. He put the lid on and pushed it to the side. The trial was over, I could feel it. He had seen the truth. He cleared his throat. This court has seen substantial evidence of Mrs. Vance's role as the primary, and indeed sole, caregiver for these children for the past 15 years. Tiffany's lawyer started to stand, but the judge waved him down. However, he continued, and my heart stopped. The children are now 17. They are old enough to have a voice in this matter. He looked past me, past the lawyers, to the 3 teenagers sitting in the front row. My grandchildren. My life. They looked terrified, their faces pale. Leo, Noah, Chloe, the judge said, his voice softening for the first time. I need you to approach the bench. I need to hear from you. My blood ran cold. I had shown him my truth. But their truth, their feelings, that was a whole other story. As they stood up on trembling legs and walked toward the judge, I realized Tiffany hadn't been fighting me. She'd been fighting for them. And I had no idea who was about to win. The walk from their seats to the judge's bench felt like a mile. Leo went first, her back straight. A miniature version of the determined little girl who'd always been the leader of the pack. Noah followed, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. Chloe trailed behind, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. They stood in a line before Judge Anderson, 3 identical sets of dark hair, and my late husband's stubborn jaw. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the witness stand to steady myself. This was the moment that mattered more than any photograph, more than any document. This was about their hearts. I know this is incredibly difficult, Judge Anderson said gently, leaning forward so only they could hear. But in the tomb-like silence of the courtroom, his words carried. I have seen what your grandmother has done for you, but your father and his wife are here, and they are asking for a chance. I need to ask you directly. Where do you want to live? Silence. It stretched on, taut and suffocating. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Please, I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Please don't let her win. Don't let her poison them. Finally, Leo cleared her throat. She was always the spokesperson. Your Honor, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though I could see a muscle twitching in her jaw. We love our grandma. She's everything to us. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. I closed my eyes, a silent thank you on my lips. But the word hung in the air, sharp and cruel. My eyes snapped open. Leo took a shaky breath. He's our father. And she's his wife. We don't know them. At all. Maybe we should. Her voice dropped to a whisper. We'd like the chance to try. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. A collective gasp went through the small public gallery. I risked a glance at Tiffany. A slow, triumphant smile was spreading across her face. She had won. She knew it. She had dangled the fantasy of a perfect, wealthy family, and my grandchildren, who had known nothing but my patched-together life, had grabbed for it. Noah and Chloe just nodded mutely, their eyes fixed on the floor. They followed Leo's lead, they always had. My son Mark finally looked at me. There wasn't triumph in his eyes, just a deep, hollow shame. But it wasn't enough to make him speak up. It never was. Judge Anderson looked from the children's conflicted faces to my stunned one. I could see the sympathy in his eyes, but his hands were tied. This is a highly unusual situation, he said, his voice laced with caution. But given the children's stated desire, and their age, I am not going to issue a final ruling on custody today. He looked at Tiffany and Mark. Instead, I am ordering a 2-week period of reconciliation. The children will travel to San Diego and stay with you. At the end of that 2 weeks we will reconvene, and they will make their final decision. He banged his gavel, a sound that felt like a death sentence. Court is adjourned. It was over. Just like that. People started moving, the low hum of conversation filling the room. My lawyer touched my arm, saying something about appeals, about fighting this, but I couldn't hear him. All I could see were my grandchildren walking toward Mark and Tiffany. Tiffany enveloped them in a hug that looked stiff and rehearsed. Mark just stood there awkwardly, patting Noah on the back. Then as they were turning to leave, I saw it. Tiffany leaned in close to Leo, her perfectly painted lips moving quickly beside her ear. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw the effect. Leo's face, which had been confused and uncertain, suddenly hardened. She glanced over at me, and for the first time in her life, her eyes held a flicker of something I'd never seen before. Doubt. Suspicion. A cold dread, sharp and icy, pierced through my shock. This wasn't just about a 2-week visit. This was a war, and Tiffany had just fired the first invisible shot. They walked out of the courtroom, my son and his wife taking my whole world with them. The silence they left behind was deafening. I sank back into the hard wooden chair, the worn shoebox feeling useless in my hands. I had brought 15 years of truth to this courtroom, but I was beginning to realize that Tiffany's lies were far more powerful, and she was just getting started. The first 3 days were a special kind of hell. The house was so quiet I could hear the old refrigerator humming, a sound I'd never noticed over the chaos of 3 teenagers. Every time I walked past their empty rooms, it was like a physical blow. I found myself cooking enough food for 4 people out of habit, then just staring at the extra plates, my appetite gone. I called them the first night. The conversation was stilted, awkward. I could hear Tiffany in the background, her voice a bright, cheerful poison. Tell your grandma about the pool. Tell her about your new rooms. They sounded distant, like I was calling them from across an ocean. The second and third nights they didn't answer. My calls went straight to voicemail. Panic started to claw at the edges of my composure. I told myself they were just busy settling in, but I knew better. Tiffany was isolating them. On the 4th day, Chloe finally called me. My heart leaped with relief, but it plummeted just as quickly when I heard her voice. It was small and tight. "Grandma," she started, and I could tell she was nervous. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Anything." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uncertain. Leo said Tiffany told her something. About money. The cold dread from the courtroom returned, gripping me tight. "What about money, honey?" "She said that you've been getting money for us all these years. From a college fund that Dad set up. And that you kept it." Her voice broke on the last word. I was floored. I literally had to sit down on the floor of my hallway. The phone pressed hard against my ear. The cruelty of it, the pure, calculated evil of that lie, took my breath away. She had taken their one uncertainty, why their father had left, and twisted it into a weapon against me. "Chloe, listen to me very carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking with rage. "That is not true. That is a terrible lie." "But Tiffany showed Leo some papers," she whispered. "Bank statements or something. She said it was proof. Forged documents." Of course. Tiffany was a professional. I had brought a shoebox full of memories to a knife fight, and she had come with a briefcase full of lies. I had spent 15 years trying to shield them from the ugliest truths of their childhood, trying to preserve some tiny, fragile image of their parents. I'd always said, "Your dad loves you, he's just figuring things out." It was a lie, I knew, but it was a kind one. A lie meant to protect them. Now I had no choice. I had to burn that lie to the ground, and it was going to hurt them more than anything I'd ever done. "There is an inheritance," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "From your grandpa Vance. My husband. He adored you 3. He set up a trust fund for you before he passed away." "A trust fund?" "Yes. A substantial one. But he was very clear in his will. The money is locked. It cannot be touched by anyone until you turn 21. He wanted to make sure it was used for your education and your futures, not for anything else." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in Chloe's head, the horrible pieces clicking into place. "So, Dad and Tiffany," she began, her voice barely audible. "They came back just before your 18th birthdays." I finished, my voice flat and dead. "The custody lawsuit wasn't about getting you back, Chloe. It was about getting control of your trust. If they were your legal guardians, their lawyers could have found a way to break the will and access the money." A small choked sob came through the phone. It was the sound of a child's last hope dying. "So she was lying," Chloe whispered. "She never wanted us." "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I said, tears now streaming down my own face. "I'm so sorry I had to be the one to tell you." We stayed on the phone for a few more minutes, but the real conversation was over. The damage was done. When we hung up, I just sat there on the cold linoleum. the silence of the house pressing in on me. Tiffany hadn't just poisoned the well. She'd poisoned the very ground the well was built on. She had forced me to destroy my own grandchildren's hearts to save them. I stared at the wall, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. At that moment I thought that was the worst of it. The worst she could possibly do. I was wrong. The worst was yet to come. For a full day I was paralyzed. I wandered through my silent house like a ghost, tidying things that were already tidy, watering plants that didn't need water. The rage and the grief were a toxic cocktail in my gut. Tiffany's lie was brilliant in its cruelty. It didn't just make me look greedy, it made their father's abandonment my fault. It suggested I was the one who had kept them apart. But on the second day, the grief started to curdle into something else. A cold, hard anger. I had played defense. I had reacted. I had shown up to court with my heart in a shoebox, hoping the truth would be enough. It wasn't. It was time to stop playing by the rules, because Tiffany wasn't just breaking them. She was rewriting the whole game. I couldn't afford a lawyer who could go toe-to-toe with Tiffany's slick corporate shark, much less a private investigator. My savings were gone, swallowed up by braces, soccer cleats, and 15 years of being the only provider. But I had something else. I had Carol. Carol and I had been friends since we were teenagers working at the same Dairy Queen. She was a retired accountant, a widow like me, with a mind as sharp as a tack and a healthy suspicion of anyone who seemed too good to be true. When I called her and laid out the whole sordid story, from the courtroom to Chloe's phone call, she was silent for a long moment. "That witch," she finally said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Okay, Eleanor. We're not letting her get away with this. What was her last name again?" "The one she uses now." "Thompson," I said. "Tiffany Thompson. And Mark's our Mark Vance. Okay, let's go digging." For the next week, my little house became a war room. We didn't need an expensive PI. We had Carol's ancient desktop computer, 2 pots of coffee constantly brewing, and the sheer, unrelenting power of 260-something women with nothing to lose and a whole lot of time on their hands. We started with the basics. Social media. Tiffany's profiles were a curated masterpiece of a perfect life. Photos of her in market charity galas in San Diego, on yachts with nameless, smiling people raising champagne glasses. The dates on the photos made my stomach clench. One picture, of her laughing on a beach in Cabo, was dated the same week Noah had pneumonia and I'd nearly lost my mind with worry. I had called Mark's old cell number a dozen times, leaving frantic messages. He never called back. Now I knew why. "She's living a life they can't afford," Carol muttered, scrolling through pages of designer clothes and expensive dinners. "Mark's salary as a sales manager can't possibly cover this." That led us to public records. It wasn't hard. A few clicks, a few small fees on my credit card. We found property records for their sprawling San Diego house. It was mortgaged to the hilt. We found 2 car loans, both on luxury SUVs, both with late payments. Then we found the credit card lawsuits. American Express, Visa, Neiman Marcus. They were drowning in debt. The inheritance from Grandpa Vance wasn't just a bonus for them. It was a lifeline. But that wasn't the discovery that made my blood run cold. It was something Carol found late on the 3rd night of our investigation. She had been cross-referencing public business filings in California with their known addresses. "Eleanor," she said, her voice quiet and tense. I hurried over to stand behind her, looking at the screen. She was on a state business registry website. Her company, Thompson Luxury Imports, is just a shell. It's an LLC with no listed assets. But look at this. She clicked a link, pulling up an archived version of the webpage. The name listed as the CEO wasn't Tiffany Thompson. It was Tiana Monroe. "That could be a mistake," I said, though a knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. "I don't think so," Carol said. She opened another tab. She had been digging into old Arizona news articles from around the time Mark had first moved there, years before he even met Tiffany. She typed, "Tiana Monroe?" an investment into the search bar. An article from a small Phoenix newspaper popped up. The headline read, "Local woman questioned in real estate promotion scam." The story was about a minor investment scheme where retirees had been bilked out of their savings. The woman they questioned was never charged. The ringleader took the fall, but her name was Tiana Monroe. And the grainy photo accompanying the article, even from over a decade ago, was unmistakable. It was Tiffany. Younger with different hair, but it was her. The same cold, calculating eyes. I had to grab the back of Carol's chair to steady myself. This wasn't just about debt. This wasn't a desperate mother making bad choices. This was a pattern. This was who she was. "Oh my God, Carol," I whispered. "It gets worse," she said grimly. She typed Tiana Monroe into a nationwide public records search. A marriage license from Clark County, Nevada popped up. Dated 5 years ago. To a man who wasn't my son. My mind was reeling, trying to process it all. The debt. The alias. The previous investigation. The secret marriage. Tiffany wasn't just a liar. She was a predator. Carol let out a low whistle. This woman isn't just married to Mark. She's a bigamist. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the picture it revealed was terrifying. Tiffany hadn't just stumbled into my family. She had targeted it. She had found my grieving, vulnerable son, learned about his wealthy father, and seen a long-term investment. The children were the key, and the trust fund was the prize. She wasn't just trying to steal my grandchildren. She had been planning to steal their future from the very beginning. Armed with a folder full of printouts that felt like a lead weight in my purse, I booked the cheapest flight I could find to San Diego. I didn't call Mark. This wasn't about him anymore. He was a passenger in his own life, and Tiffany was at the wheel. This was between me and her. I texted her from a prepaid burner phone I'd bought at a 7-Eleven. "We need to talk. Alone." She replied almost instantly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it to my lawyer." I typed back, my fingers flying across the tiny screen. "I don't think you want your lawyer to know about Tiana Monroe." The 3 little dots appeared and disappeared for a full 5 minutes. Finally, a new message popped up. "Where?" I chose a place deliberately. A noisy, slightly grimy all-night diner off the highway called The Griddle. There would be no fancy lattes or hush tones here. This was my turf. Fluorescent lights, cracked vinyl booths, and the smell of grease. A place where a life like mine felt more real than the fantasy she was living. She walked in looking completely out of place. Her expensive beige coat a beacon of wealth in the sea of worn-out work shirts and jeans. She slid into the booth opposite me, her lips curled in a sneer. "All right, Eleanor. You have my attention. What is this little drama about?" I didn't say anything at first. I just opened my folder and slid the first piece of paper across the sticky table. It was the printout of her maxed-out American Express statement. "You seem to be having some trouble with your bills," I said, my voice calm and even. She glanced at it and laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "Oh please. A little credit card debt? That's your big bombshell? Mark is about to get a huge promotion. We're fine. Are you?" I slid another stack of papers across. The late notices on her car loans. The lawsuit from the department store. "It doesn't look fine to me. It looks desperate." Her smile faltered. "What do you want, Eleanor? Money? Is that it? Are you trying to blackmail me?" "I don't want your money, Tiffany. I have something you'll never have. A clear conscience." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I slid the next document over. The business filing for her shell company, with the name Tiana Monroe circled in red ink. The color drained from her face. I saw her hand, the one resting on the table, begin to tremble slightly. She tried to cover it with her other hand. "And this," I said, placing the final exhibit on the table with a soft thud. "The grainy newspaper article from Arizona. This must be your long-lost twin sister." She stared at the picture of the younger, harder-faced version of herself. The name Tiana Monroe practically jumped off the page. She looked up at me, and for the first time the mask was gone. I saw raw, cornered fury in her eyes. The game was up and she knew it. But instead of folding, she leaned forward, her voice a low, vicious hiss. "You think you're so smart, you old hag. You think you've won." "I think the truth is finally on the table," I said quietly. She let out that same brittle laugh, but this time it was laced with menace. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Okay, so I have a past. So what? Who do you think they'll believe? You, a bitter old woman who's angry she's losing her meal tickets? Or me, their father's wife, who's offering them a beautiful home and a life you could never give them?" My blood ran cold. She wasn't even trying to deny it. "You show them those papers," she whispered. leaning so close I could smell her expensive perfume. And I will destroy you. I will tell them you forged everything. That you're obsessed, that you're senile. I will paint you as a monster. A kidnapper who's so desperate not to be alone that she'd invent a whole fantasy to keep them. They'll hate you, Eleanor. By the time I'm done, they will never want to speak your name again. It was the cruelest, most effective threat she could have possibly made. She was threatening to burn down the one thing I had left in the world. Their love for me. For a second I faltered. The thought of them looking at me with hatred in their eyes was a pain I couldn't imagine surviving. But then I thought of their faces smeared with birthday cake. I thought of Leo's science fair ribbon, Noah's quiet kindness, Chloe's feverish hand in mine. They were my children in every way that mattered. And you don't back down when your children are in danger. You become a monster to fight the monster. I looked her dead in the eye, my fear solidifying into pure cold steel. She had made a fatal miscalculation. She thought I was just like her, motivated by selfishness. She didn't understand the power of a mother's love. You have 24 hours, I said, my voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, but it cut through the diner's noise like a razor. You will call your lawyer and withdraw the custody petition. You will put the children on a plane back to Austin. And then you will disappear from our lives forever. Or what? She sneered. You'll show them your little folder of nonsense? No, I said, gathering my papers and sliding them back into the folder. I stood up, looking down at the woman who had tried to ruin my life. She thought she had me cornered. She thought she knew my every move. But she had no idea about the final devastating piece of evidence I had been holding back. Or, I said, letting the word hang in the air, I'll make one phone call. And I'll tell your other husband exactly where to find you. The look on Tiffany's face was worth every sleepless night, every tear I'd shed. The smug confidence vanished, replaced by sheer primal terror. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. Bigamy. It was the one crime that connected her two fraudulent lives. The one thread that, if pulled, would unravel everything. Her life with Mark in San Diego, her past in Arizona. It would all come crashing down. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the diner, leaving her sitting there in the cracked vinyl booth. The ruins of her life spread out on the table in front of her. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was adrenaline. For the first time in 15 years I wasn't a victim. I was a fighter. I flew back to Austin that night, my mind a whirlwind. Would she do it? Would she risk everything? Or would she cut her losses and run? The 24 hours I had given her felt like an eternity. I spent the next day cleaning my already spotless house. Unable to sit still, my phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline. The call never came. The deadline passed in silence. A new kind of fear began to creep in. Maybe I had underestimated her. Maybe she had another angle, another lie I hadn't seen coming. Maybe she was calling my bluff. The next morning I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee, when my friend Carol called. Her voice was breathless. Eleanor, turn on the TV. Now. Any national news channel. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fumbled for the remote, my fingers clumsy. I clicked it on to a 24-hour news network. And there she was. It was Tiffany's face, a professionally shot headshot, on the screen next to the face of a well-known San Diego councilman. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, Councilman, associate arrested in major real estate fraud ring. I sank into my chair, my legs suddenly weak. The reporter's voice was a drone in the background. Arrested early this morning, long-running FBI investigation, shell corporations, bilking investors out of millions. Her associate, the reporter said, was a woman named Tiana Monroe, also known as Tiffany Thompson. It turned out my little investigation with Carol had just scratched the surface. Tiffany wasn't just a small-time scammer. She was a key player in a massive scheme. Her secret husband wasn't just some forgotten mistake from her past. He was likely another victim or a minor player she discarded along the way. The FBI had been building a case against her and the councilman for months. My confrontation in the diner, my threats, they didn't matter in the end. The wheels of justice were already turning. Her time had simply run out. My first thought was a savage surge of triumph. She got what she deserved. Justice. My second thought, immediate and gut-wrenching, was the kids. They would be waking up in that house, that beautiful house built on lies, and turning on the TV. They would see their father's wife, the woman who was supposed to be their new mother, in handcuffs. They would hear her real name. They would learn the truth in the cruelest, most public way possible. I had to get to them first. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial Leo's number. It rang once, twice, and then she picked up. "Grandma." Her voice was sleepy. "Leo, honey, listen to me," I said, trying to sound calm, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to wake up your brothers. Don't turn on the TV. Don't look at your phones. Just wake them up and wait for me to call you back in 5 minutes on a video call. Can you do that for me?" "What? Grandma, what's wrong?" I could hear the fear creeping into her voice. "Just please, baby. Please trust me. Do it now." I hung up, my mind racing. How do you tell the children you've raised, the children you love more than life itself, that the fantasy they just started to believe in was a monstrous lie? How do you explain that their father had brought a criminal into their lives? There was no easy way. There was only the truth, as brutal and ugly as it was. I took a deep breath, waited 5 agonizing minutes, and then I hit the video call button, preparing to shatter their world all over again. Their 3 faces popped up on my small phone screen, huddled together on a ridiculously plush sofa, a crystal chandelier hanging in the background behind them. They looked tired and scared. The opulent room was a stark contrast to the ugly truth I was about to deliver. "What's going on, Grandma?" Noah asked, his brow furrowed with worry. I didn't sugarcoat it. I couldn't. They deserved better than that. "There's something you need to know about Tiffany," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "She was arrested this morning." I watched their expressions change in real time. Confusion, then shock, then a slow dawning comprehension. I told them everything. About the FBI, the fraud investigation, the alias Tiana Monroe. I told them it had nothing to do with me, that this was a long time coming. I left out the part about my own investigation and the confrontation. They didn't need to carry that burden. When I finished, there was a profound silence. I had expected tears, anger, maybe even denial. Instead, they just looked at each other. A silent conversation passing between them. The shock on their faces slowly morphed into something else, something I couldn't quite read. It looked almost like relief. "So," Leo said finally, her voice flat. "She wasn't sick. She wasn't struggling. She was a crook." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A final bitter acceptance of a reality they had probably felt in their bones all along. "We were just the key to the money," Noah said so quietly I could barely hear him. "The inheritance." "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my heart aching for them. "Don't be," Chloe said, and her voice was surprisingly strong. "You were the only one who ever told us the truth." Just then I saw movement behind them. My son Mark walked into the frame. His face was ashen, his eyes red-rimmed. He had clearly been crying. "Mom," he started, his voice thick with shame. I didn't know. I swear. I knew she had debts, I knew things were tight, but I had no idea about any of this." Leo turned and looked at her father, her expression unreadable. "You didn't know? Or you didn't want to know?" The question, coming from his own daughter, hit him like a physical blow. He flinched, unable to answer. He just stood there, a pathetic, broken man who had let a monster into his children's lives because he was too weak to stand up to her. The kids didn't say another word to him. They just turned their attention back to me on the phone screen. The rest of the day was a blur of logistics. I arranged flights, getting them on the first plane back to Austin. Mark didn't protest. He seemed to have shrunk, all the fight gone out of him. He knew he had lost them, maybe forever. They landed late that night. When I saw them walk through the gate, I burst into tears. They rushed to me, and we all clung to each other. A small battered island in the middle of the bustling airport. They were home. That was all that mattered. The next morning, as we were sitting around the kitchen table, trying to pretend things were normal, my phone rang. It was a number from San Diego I didn't recognize. I answered, putting it on speaker. "Mrs. Vance," a smooth, professional voice said. "This is Stephen Mills. I'm the attorney representing Ms. Tiana Monroe, also known as Tiffany Thompson." I felt my children tense beside me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. "My client finds herself in a very difficult legal situation," he said, as if discussing the weather. She is, however, prepared to make a deal. She will sign away all parental rights, relinquish any claim to the custody of the children, and never contact them again. My heart skipped a beat. This was everything I wanted. In exchange for what? I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. In exchange, the lawyer said calmly, for you posting her bail and covering her legal fees. She believes a payment of $250,000 would be a fair starting point for the negotiation. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it left me speechless. Even from a jail cell, she was trying to ransom my grandchildren. She was trying to sell them back to me. I looked at my kids. Leo's face was a mask of cold fury. Noah was shaking his head in disbelief. Chloe just looked sad, utterly defeated by the boundless selfishness of the woman who had helped bring her into this world. Noah looked at me, his eyes pleading. What are you going to tell him, Grandma? I picked up the phone, a cold, calm certainty settling over me. I knew exactly what to say. I was going to give his client the answer she and he so richly deserved. I was going to tell him what my grandchildren's freedom was worth to her. I took a deep breath, the silence in our small kitchen stretching tight. The lawyer on the other end of the line was waiting, confident, I'm sure, that a desperate old grandmother would pay any price. He didn't know me at all. Mr. Mills, I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. Let me be perfectly clear. You can tell your client that hell will freeze over before she sees a single dime from me. She is worth nothing to me. Do you understand? Before he could respond, I hung up. I pressed the end call button with a satisfying finality. A heavy silence fell over the table. Then Leo started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound, it was brittle and sharp, but it was a release. Soon Noah and Chloe joined in, and then me. We laughed until tears streamed down our faces, a wild, slightly hysterical sound of a family that had been to hell and back, and somehow, inexplicably, survived. The months that followed were a time of quiet healing. Tiffany took a plea deal and was sentenced to several years in federal prison. Mark faded into the background of our lives. He'd call sometimes, leaving sad, rambling voicemails that the kids would listen to and then delete without comment. The divorce was quiet and swift. He didn't fight for custody. He had no ground to stand on. He was a ghost in their past, a lesson in what not to become. We fell back into our old rhythm, but something had changed. The kids were no longer kids. The ordeal had forced them into an adulthood they weren't ready for. But they wore it with a quiet dignity that broke my heart and made me prouder than I'd ever been. They focused on their schoolwork with a fierce determination, their eyes set on a future that they would build for themselves. Their 18th birthdays came and went, a quiet celebration with a homemade cake and their favorite meal. A few weeks later, the letter from the trust attorney arrived. The inheritance from their grandpa Vance was officially theirs. It was a staggering amount of money, enough to change their lives forever. I worried, of course. I worried the money would be a burden, another complication in their already complicated lives. I shouldn't have. They had learned a hard lesson about money and what it could do to people. The first thing they did surprised me completely. One Saturday morning they insisted I come with them, refusing to tell me where we were going. They drove my rattling old sedan, the one that squealed every time I made a left turn, to a certified pre-owned car dealership. What are we doing here? I asked, confused. Grandma, Leo said, turning to me from the driver's seat. You have driven us to every soccer practice, every doctor's appointment, every school dance in this car. It's time you had something safe. Something that won't break down on the highway. Before I could protest, they led me onto the lot. An hour later, I was the stunned owner of a sensible silver Subaru paid for in full. As the dealer handed me the keys, I burst into tears right there on the showroom floor. It wasn't about the car. It was about the love behind it, the quiet, profound way they were already taking care of me. I thought that was the grand gesture. I thought that was their way of saying thank you. But a few weeks after that, they staged what they called a family meeting. They sat me down on the lumpy old sofa, the three of them perched opposite me on dining chairs they dragged into the living room. They looked so serious, so adult, that a jolt of fear went through me. Grandma, Noah began, his voice solemn, we've been doing a lot of thinking. About the future. About our family. Okay, I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. This house, it's been amazing, Chloe said. looking around at the cramped familiar room. You made it a home for us. But we're getting bigger. And you deserve more space. You deserve a garden. I had no idea where this was going. I love my garden, I said, gesturing to the few pots on my front porch. Leo took a deep breath and slid a thick folder across the coffee table toward me. Her expression was a mixture of nervousness and excitement. This is for you, Grandma, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For us. My hands trembled as I reached for the folder. It was from a real estate company. I opened it, my eyes scanning the official-looking documents inside. I saw property deeds, inspection reports, and legal jargon I didn't understand. And then I saw the address and a photograph clipped to the top page. It was a house. A beautiful 4-bedroom house on a quiet tree-lined street called Maple, with a wide front porch and a huge backyard. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up at them, completely bewildered. We bought it, Leo said, a huge grin breaking across her face. It's ours. I stared at the photograph, then back at their hopeful, smiling faces. A house. A real house with a yard and a porch and enough bedrooms so they wouldn't have to share anymore. It was more than I had ever allowed myself to dream of. But how? I stammered, my mind struggling to catch up. The money. That's for your college, for your futures. You can't. We already did, Noah interrupted gently. Grandma, we sat down with a financial advisor. A real one, he added, with a small, sad smile that acknowledged the scams of their past. We've allocated everything. College is fully funded. We each have a nest egg to start our adult lives. This house. This is from a separate part of the fund Grandpa set aside for family well-being. The advisor said a stable home is the best investment we could make. Our future includes you, Grandma, Chloe said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. It always has. We're a package deal. Tears I hadn't expected began tracking down my cheeks. For 15 years I had been their rock, their foundation. I had provided the stability. It had never once occurred to me that one day, they would be the ones to provide it for me. They had watched me sacrifice, watched me stretch every dollar, and they had learned. They hadn't learned greed or entitlement from Tiffany and Mark. They had learned the opposite. They had learned that the truest measure of wealth was taking care of the people you love. I was so overwhelmed I couldn't even speak. I just shook my head, wiping at my eyes with the back of my hand. But they weren't finished. Leo cleared her throat, looking a little nervous now. There's something else, Grandma. She pushed another, smaller envelope across the table. This one was from a lawyer's office. My heart, which had been soaring, immediately plummeted. What now? What other legal battle could possibly be left to fight? It's okay, Leo said quickly, seeing the panic on my face. It's a good thing. We promise. With trembling fingers I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of official-looking court documents. Petitions. I scanned the first page, my eyes catching on the legal phrasing. Petition for change of name. I looked at Leo's name, then Noah's, then Chloe's. They were all there. And then I saw it. The names they were petitioning to change to. Leo Vance Thompson. Noah Vance Thompson. Chloe Vance Thompson. They were adding my name to theirs. The air left my lungs in a rush. Of all the things they could have done, this was the most profound. It was a declaration. Claiming. They were taking the name of the woman who had raised them, and weaving it into their own identities forever. It was an honor so deep, so unexpected, that I felt my heart would burst. Your father, I finally whispered when I could find my voice. Thompson is his family name. And Vance is ours, Noah said firmly. We'll carry both legacies. Dad's and yours. The family he came from, and the family you built for us. You are our mother in every way that matters, Grandma, Leo said, her voice choked with emotion. It's time the paperwork reflected that reality. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the sheer staggering completeness of the moment. In her selfish, greedy quest for money, Tiffany had lost everything. Her freedom, her dignity, her children. And in doing so, she had inadvertently given me the greatest gifts of my life. She had shown these children the stark difference between the woman who had given birth to them and the woman who truly, unconditionally loved them. I reached across the table and they met me halfway. We ended up in a heap on the floor. A tangle of arms and legs, laughing and crying all at once. The lumpy old sofa, the cramped little room, none of it mattered. We were a family. Not a broken one, not a makeshift one. A whole one. Forged in fire and stronger than steel. That night I fell asleep not in my sagging old bed, but on the sofa, with the real estate folder and the name change petitions held tightly to my chest like the most precious treasures in the world. Which, of course, they were. Moving into the house on Maple Street felt like stepping into a different life. The air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. For the first time in 15 years, I had a kitchen with enough counter space to cook a real holiday meal without stacking pots and pans on the floor. The kids each claimed a bedroom, painting the walls in colors that reflected their personalities. A calming blue for Noah, a vibrant yellow for Chloe, and a studious gray for Leo. But my favorite part was the garden. A huge sun-drenched patch of earth in the backyard. The day after we moved in, the kids surprised me again. A truck pulled up and delivered bags of soil, flats of tomato and cucumber seedlings, rose bushes, and a brand new set of gardening tools. We spent the entire weekend digging in the dirt together, our hands and faces smeared with soil, our laughter echoing in the quiet suburban street. As I planted the first rose bush, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing for years. I was putting down roots, literally and figuratively. That fall, they all left for college. Leo went to UT Austin, right there in town, majoring in pre-law. She wanted to be a family law attorney, she said, to help kids who were stuck in situations like theirs. Noah, my quiet, thoughtful boy, was accepted into the engineering program at Texas A&M, and Chloe, my free-spirited artist, got a scholarship to the Savannah College of Art and Design. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the aching, empty silence of the old apartment. It was a peaceful quiet, filled with the hum of a home that was loved and lived in. Their rooms were there, waiting for them. And every weekend, Leo would drive home with a car full of laundry and friends, filling the space with noise and life. The others called every night, their faces appearing on my laptop screen, sharing stories about their classes, their new friends, their dreams. During that first winter break, the house truly became a home. They all came back, and the quiet was replaced by the familiar, happy chaos I had missed so much. We cooked together in the big kitchen, their heads bent over old family recipes. We decorated a huge Christmas tree that actually fit in our living room. One night, a blizzard hit Austin, a rare event that shut down the whole city. We were snowed in, just the four of us. We sat by the fireplace drinking hot chocolate, watching the snow fall outside the big picture window. The power flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness lit only by the dancing flames. No one panicked. Chloe found some candles, Noah kept the fire going, and Leo told stories that made us all laugh. In that quiet, candlelit moment, I looked at them. They were no longer the frightened toddlers who had been dropped on my doorstep. They were confident, brilliant, compassionate young adults. Leo with her fierce sense of justice. Noah with his steady, gentle hands that could build or fix anything. Chloe who saw beauty in everything and captured it on canvas. They were survivors. More than that, they were thrivers. You know, Leo said, staring into the fire. For a long time, I used to wonder what was so wrong with us that they left. My heart ached at her words. But I don't wonder that anymore, she continued, looking around the room at her siblings, at me. There was nothing wrong with us. We just ended up with the right mom in the end. Noah and Chloe nodded, their eyes shining in the firelight. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the love of my children, because that's what they were in every sense of the word, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The storm raged outside, but inside our little house on Maple Street, we were safe. We were home. We had built this foundation together, and it was strong enough to withstand anything. As I look back on it all now, sitting here on my porch swing, watching the roses I planted bloom in the garden, I finally understand the nature of true justice. It doesn't always come from a judge's gavel or a prison sentence. Sometimes justice is quiet. The real punishment for Tiffany and Mark wasn't what happened in a courtroom. Their punishment is the silence. It's every birthday they'll miss, every holiday they won't be a part of, every success they won't get to celebrate. Their punishment is the gaping hole in their lives where a family should be. They traded the immeasurable treasure of their children's love for a handful of dust, and they will live in that self-made poverty for the rest of their days. What they abandoned I cherished. What they threw away I built a life around. They taught me the hardest and most beautiful lesson of all. Family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. It's about sacrifice. It's about choosing to stay and to fight when it would be so much easier to run away. It's the steadfast, unrelenting, unconditional act of love. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know I can't be the only one who has faced a battle like this, who has had to become a warrior to protect the people they love. What does the word family truly mean to you? I would be honored to read your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. You are not alone. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world.